close your eyes and imagine a world of beauty, of wonder, but also of pain. A world where children hunger, where storms destroy, where illness takes without warning. Why? Why does suffering exist? If there is a God, all-powerful, all-knowing, and all-good, how could such pain be allowed? This question has echoed through the ages. It's called the problem of evil, and it's one of the deepest mysteries of existence. Philosophers, theologians, and seekers of truth have wrestled with it for centuries, and yet it remains unanswered. But tonight, we won't rush for answers. Instead, we'll wander through the ideas, the stories, and the questions that surround this timeless dilemma. So let your mind drift as we explore the problem of evil together. Let the words wash over you, like waves on a quiet shore. And perhaps, in the stillness, you'll find a moment of peace, or a spark of understanding. To understand the problem of evil, we must first journey back in time to the very beginnings of human thought. Long ago, in the quiet corners of the ancient world, people began to ask questions. Questions about the nature of the universe, the meaning of life, and the existence of suffering. One of the earliest voices to grapple with this question was the Greek philosopher Epicurus. Over 2,000 years ago, he posed a simple yet profound dilemma. If God is willing to prevent evil, but cannot, then he is not all-powerful. If he can but is not willing, then he is not all good. And if he is both willing and able, then why does evil exist? This question, now known as the Epicurean paradox, has echoed through the centuries. It challenges us to reconcile the existence of suffering with the idea of a benevolent, all-powerful God. But Epicurus was not alone in his questioning. Across the world, in different cultures and traditions, others were also wrestling with the mystery of suffering. In ancient India, the Buddha taught that suffering is an inherent part of existence. He called it dukkha, the ache of life, the dissatisfaction that comes from clinging to things that are fleeting. For the Buddha, the path to peace lay not in understanding why suffering exists, but in transcending it altogether. Meanwhile, in the West, the early Christian theologian Augustine took a different approach. Augustine believed that evil was not a thing in itself, but rather the absence of good. Like darkness is the absence of light. He argued that God created a world that was perfectly good, but that goodness was marred by the free will of humans and angels. When they chose to turn away from God, they introduced evil into the world. But even Augustine's explanation left questions unanswered. If evil is merely the absence of good, why does it cause so much pain? Why does it seem to have such power over our lives? As we ponder these ancient ideas, let's take a moment to reflect. What is evil truly? Is it something tangible, something we can see and touch? Or is it more elusive, like a shadow that follows us wherever we go? In the quiet of this moment, let's explore two kinds of evil that philosophers have long distinguished. First, there is moral evil, the suffering caused by human actions. War, cruelty, greed. These are the choices we make, the harm we inflict on one another. Think of the wars that have scarred our history, the injustices that have torn communities apart. These are not acts of nature, but the consequences of human decisions. And then there is natural evil, the suffering caused by the world itself. Earthquakes, diseases, the relentless passage of time, these are the forces beyond our control. A child born with a painful illness, a village destroyed by a flood, a life cut short by chance. These are the moments that make us question the fairness of the universe. Together, these two forms of evil shape our experience of the world. They challenge our understanding of justice, of meaning, of the divine. But as we drift deeper into this exploration, let's remember, this is not a journey for answers alone. It's a journey for reflection, for stillness, for the quiet wisdom that comes when we sit with the questions themselves. Let's take a step further back to the very origins of these ideas. In ancient Mesopotamia, the Epic of Gilgamesh told the story of a king who sought immortality, only to learn that death and suffering are inevitable parts of life. In ancient Greece, the tragedians wrote plays about the capriciousness of the gods, who often seemed indifferent to human suffering. And in the Hebrew Bible, the book of Job tells the story of a man who loses everything, his wealth, his health, his family, and yet refuses to curse God. Job's story raises profound questions about the nature of suffering and the silence of the divine. These stories, these questions, have been with us for millennia. They remind us that the problem of evil is not just a philosophical puzzle, but a deeply human one. It's a question that touches every life, every heart. It's a question that has no easy answers, and perhaps no answers at all. So, as we drift through these ancient thoughts, let's allow ourselves to sit with the mystery. Let's not rush to conclusions, but instead let the questions linger, like the soft glow of a candle in the night. And as you close your eyes, let your mind wander. Through the ages, through the stories, through the quiet wisdom of those who came before us. Perhaps in the stillness, you'll find your own insights, glimmering like stars in the night sky. Imagine this, you're standing at the edge of a vast, endless ocean. The waves crash against the shore, each one carrying a question, a thought, a possibility. This ocean is the problem of evil, and its depths hold the answers, or at least the attempts, that philosophers have offered over centuries. Let's wade into these waters together, starting with the free will defense. Picture a world where every choice is already made, where every action, every word, every thought is predetermined. No mistakes, no pain, no suffering, but also no love, no courage, no growth. This is the heart of the free will defense. It argues that evil exists because free will is necessary for genuine love and morality. Without the ability to choose, we would be nothing more than puppets, moving through life without meaning. But here's the twist. Couldn't God have created free will without evil? Couldn't he have made a world where we always choose the good? As you ponder this, let your mind drift. Through the possibilities, through the what ifs. What would a world without free will look like? Would it be a world worth living in? Now, let's dive deeper into the soul-making theodicy. Imagine a sculptor chiseling away at a block of stone. Each strike of the hammer, each cut of the blade is painful, but slowly, surely, a masterpiece emerges. This is the idea behind soul-making. Philosophers like John Hick suggest that suffering is not meaningless, but rather a necessary part of our growth as moral and spiritual beings. Just as the sculptor's tools shape the stone, so too does suffering shape us. But here's the unsettling part. Is all suffering truly redemptive? What about the pain that breaks people, that leaves them shattered instead of stronger? Those who have endured great suffering, did they find meaning in their pain? Or was it simply a burden to bear? Next, we come to the best of all possible worlds, an idea championed by the philosopher Gottfried Wilhelm Leibniz. Imagine a painter standing before an infinite canvas. Every stroke of the brush, every color, every detail is carefully chosen to create a perfect harmony. Leibniz believed that God, in his infinite wisdom, created a world with a perfect balance of good and evil. This is the best of all possible worlds, not because it's free from suffering, but because it's the most balanced, the most harmonious. But this most optimistic idea of its time was famously challenged by Voltaire in his novel Candide. The story follows Candide, a young man raised in a sheltered paradise, taught by his mentor, Pangloss, that everything happens for the best. Pangloss, a caricature of the philosopher Leibniz, insists that even the worst tragedies are part of a perfect plan, a harmonious balance ordained by God. But Candide's idyllic life is shattered when he's cast out into the world. What follows is a series of relentless tragedies: wars, natural disasters, betrayals, and losses. Candide is flogged, shipwrecked, robbed, and even buried alive. Through it all, Candide clings to Pangloss's mantra: this is the best of all possible worlds. But as the tragedies pile up, the idea begins to crumble. How can this be the best world when it's filled with so much suffering? Voltaire's novel is a scathing critique of blind optimism, a challenge to the idea that suffering can always be justified. It's a reminder that life is often chaotic, unpredictable, and deeply unfair. But Candide is more than just a critique. It's also a call to action. In the face of suffering, Voltaire suggests we must not retreat into empty platitudes. Instead, we must take responsibility for our own lives and work to make the world a better place. Now, let's turn to the existentialist perspective. Thinkers like Albert Camus and Jean-Paul Sartre rejected the idea of a divine plan altogether. For them, suffering is not a puzzle to be solved, but a reality to be faced. Camus, in particular, saw the universe as indifferent to human suffering. In his essay, The Myth of Sisyphus, he imagines life as an endless, futile struggle. Like Sisyphus, condemned to roll a boulder up a hill for eternity. At first, the task seems futile, meaningless, but Camus suggests that Sisyphus can find joy in the struggle itself. By embracing the absurdity of his situation, Sisyphus transcends it, finding a kind of freedom in the act of pushing the boulder. It's not about the destination, but the journey. Not about the victory, but the effort. Kerry Fox, a young Canadian athlete who lost his leg to cancer. Instead of succumbing to despair, Terry decided to run across Canada to raise money for cancer research. His journey, known as the Marathon of Hope, was grueling. He ran over 3,000 miles on one leg, enduring pain, exhaustion, and setbacks. But through it all, Terry found joy. Not in the finish line, but in the act of running itself. Finally, we come to the process theodicy, a more modern response that suggests God is not all-powerful in the traditional sense. Instead, God works with the world, coaxing it toward goodness, but not controlling it completely. This idea, developed by philosophers like Alfred North Whitehead and Charles Hartshorne, sees God as a fellow traveler, a co-sufferer, one who feels our pain and works with us to bring about healing and growth. In this view, God is not a distant ruler, but a compassionate presence, intimately involved in the unfolding of the universe. God doesn't control every event, but instead influences the world through persuasion, inviting creation toward greater harmony and beauty. But here's the twist. If God is not all-powerful, why does suffering exist? Process theodicy suggests that the universe is still a work in progress. Like a sculptor shaping a block of stone, God is working with the raw materials of existence, guiding them toward a greater good. This idea resonates deeply with real-life experiences. Take, for example, the story of Viktor Frankl, a Holocaust survivor who found meaning in the midst of unimaginable suffering. Frankl believed that even in the darkest moments, we have the freedom to choose our response. In process theodicy, God is like Frankl, not causing the suffering, but present within it, offering hope and the possibility of transformation. But this raises questions of its own. If God is not all-powerful, can he truly be called God? And if he suffers with us, does that make our suffering any easier to bear? What does it mean to believe in a God who suffers alongside us? Process theodicy invites us to see the universe as a collaborative project, a shared journey between God and creation. It's a vision of hope, of possibility, of a future where suffering is not the end of the story, but a step on the path towards something greater. So, as we drift through these ideas, let's allow ourselves to linger in the stillness. Let's not rush to conclusions, but instead let the questions unfold. Like the petals of a flower in the morning light, and as you close your eyes, let your thoughts settle, like leaves floating on a quiet pond. Perhaps in the quiet, you'll find your own insights, glimmering like stars in the night sky. One, Christianity. Step into a quiet moment. The soft glow of candlelight flickers against stone walls, and the air hums with the weight of centuries of prayer. This is the world of Christianity, a faith that has wrestled with one of humanity's most profound questions. How can a loving God allow suffering to exist? At the heart of Christianity lies a paradox. A God who is all-powerful, all-knowing, and all-good, yet a world filled with pain, loss, and injustice. This tension has shaped centuries of thought, art, and devotion. One of the most striking explorations of this question is found in the story of Job. Job was a man who had everything: wealth, family, health. But in a series of devastating events, he lost it all. His children died, his wealth vanished, and his body was covered in painful sores. Job's cries to God are raw and unfiltered. Why is this happening to me? What have I done to deserve this? His questions echo through the ages, a testament to the universality of human suffering. God's response is both mysterious and profound. He doesn't explain Job's suffering. Instead, he speaks of the vastness of creation, the complexity of the universe, the limits of human understanding. In the end, Job finds peace not in answers, but in trust. Trust that God's ways are beyond his comprehension. Trust that even in the midst of suffering, there is a greater purpose. But this doesn't erase the questions. Can trust alone justify suffering? What about those who endure pain without ever finding meaning? Consider the story of Nick Vujicic, born without arms or legs. As a child, Nick struggled with despair, even attempting to take his own life. But over time, he found a way to transform his suffering into purpose. Today, he travels the world as a motivational speaker, sharing a story of hope and resilience. For Nick, his pain became a platform to inspire others. But not everyone finds such meaning in their suffering. For many, pain remains a heavy burden, a question without an answer. Christianity doesn't offer easy answers to the problem of evil, but it does offer a promise. a promise that even in the darkest moments, God is present, that even in the midst of suffering, there is hope. This hope is embodied in the story of Jesus Christ, who endured unimaginable suffering, betrayal, torture, and death, only to rise again. For Christians, this is the ultimate reminder that suffering is not the end of the story. The tension between suffering and hope is at the core of Christian faith. It's a faith that doesn't shy away from the hard questions, but instead faces them head-on. Christianity invites us to hold both the reality of suffering and the promise of redemption in our hearts. It's a faith that acknowledges the darkness, yet points toward the light. Two, Islam. Step into the quiet of a mosque at dawn. The air is cool, the light's soft, and the sound of prayer fills the space like a gentle hum. This is the world of Islam, a faith that offers its own profound perspective on the problem of evil. In Islam, suffering is often seen as a test, a trial sent by Allah to strengthen faith, purify the soul, and bring believers closer to Him. This idea is rooted in the concept of qadar, or divine decree, which teaches that everything in the universe happens according to Allah's will. The Quran speaks of suffering as a means of growth and purification. It tells the story of Prophet Ayub, or Job, who endured immense hardship, losing his wealth, his health, and his family. Yet, through it all, Ayub remained steadfast in his faith, trusting in Allah's wisdom. In the end, Ayub's patience was rewarded. His health was restored, his family returned, and his faith deepened. For Muslims, Ayub's story is a powerful reminder that suffering is not meaningless, but a test of faith and trust in Allah's plan. But this raises deeper questions. Why does Allah allow suffering in the first place? If He is all-powerful and all-merciful, why not create a world free from pain? Islamic theology offers a nuanced answer. Suffering, while difficult, serves a purpose. It can be a means of atonement for sins, a way to develop patience and resilience, or a reminder of the temporary nature of this world. Consider the story of Malala Yousafzai, the young Pakistani activist who was shot by the Taliban for advocating girls' education. Malala's suffering could have broken her, but instead it became a catalyst for change. Through her ordeal, Malala found strength in her faith. She saw her suffering not as a punishment, but as a test, a chance to stand up for what she believed in and inspire millions around the world. Islam also teaches that suffering is not the end of the story. The Quran promises that those who endure hardship with patience and faith will be rewarded in the afterlife. This belief offers hope, a reminder that the trials of this world are temporary and that ultimate justice lies in the hands of Allah. The tension between suffering and hope is at the heart of Islamic faith. It's a faith that acknowledges the reality of pain, yet points toward a greater purpose. Three, Hinduism and Buddhism. Step into the stillness of an ancient temple. The air is thick with the scent of incense, and the sound of chanting lingers in the silence. This is the world of Hinduism and Buddhism, two traditions that offer profound insights into the nature of suffering. In Hinduism, suffering is often seen as the result of karma, the law of cause and effect. Every action, every thought, every intention has consequences, shaping our present and future. The concept of karma teaches that suffering is not random, but the result of past actions. It's a call to take responsibility for our lives, to live in alignment with Dharma, our duty or moral order. Consider the story of Arunima Sinha, the first female amputee to climb Mount Everest. After losing her leg in a tragic accident, Arunima could have succumbed to despair. Instead, she saw her suffering as an opportunity for growth. Through sheer determination and faith in her dharma, Arunima transformed her pain into purpose. Her story is a powerful reminder that suffering, while difficult, can be a catalyst for transformation, but Hinduism also offers a way out of suffering. The ultimate goal is moksha, liberation from the cycle of birth, death, and rebirth. Through self-realization and devotion, one can transcend suffering and unite with the divine. In Buddhism, suffering takes center stage. The Buddha's first noble truth is that life is dukkha, marked by suffering, impermanence, and dissatisfaction. But the Buddha didn't stop there. He offered a path to liberation, the Four Noble Truths and the Eightfold Path. Suffering, he taught, arises from attachment and desire. By letting go of these, one can find peace. Take the story of Thich Nhat Hanh, the Vietnamese monk who dedicated his life to peace and mindfulness. During the Vietnam War, Thich Nhat Hanh witnessed unimaginable suffering. Yet, through his practice, he found a way to cultivate inner peace and compassion. For Thich Nhat Hanh, suffering was not something to be avoided, but something to be understood. By embracing mindfulness, he transformed his pain into a source of wisdom and healing. Hinduism and Buddhism offer contrasting perspectives on suffering. In Hinduism, suffering is often seen as a result of karma, a call to live in alignment with dharma. In Buddhism, suffering is an inherent part of existence, a call to let go of attachment and desire. Yet both traditions point toward a deeper truth, that suffering, while painful, can be a path to growth, wisdom, and liberation. Four, atheism and secular humanism. Step into the quiet of a modern library. The air is still, the lights soft, and the shelves are filled with the thoughts of countless minds. This is the world of atheism and secular humanism, perspectives that approach the problem of evil without the framework of divine intervention. For atheists and secular humanists, suffering is not a test, a punishment, or a divine mystery. It's a natural part of existence, shaped by chance, biology, and human choices. In this view, the problem of evil is not about reconciling suffering with a benevolent God, but about understanding its causes and working to alleviate it. Suffering is seen as a call to action, a reminder of our responsibility to each other and to the world. Richard Dawkins, the evolutionary biologist and prominent atheist. Dawkins sees the universe as a place governed by natural laws, without divine intervention. For him, suffering is not part of a grand plan, but a consequence of evolution and the randomness of existence. Dawkins' work challenges us to confront the harsh realities of life without the comfort of divine explanations. Instead, he emphasizes the importance of reason, science, and human agency in addressing suffering. Secular humanism takes this idea further. It emphasizes the potential for human beings to create meaning, to build a better world through reason, empathy, and cooperation. Take the example of Paul Farmer, the physician and anthropologist who dedicated his life to providing healthcare to the poorest communities in the world. Farmer co-founded Partners in Health, an organization that brings medical care to those who need it most, often in the face of immense suffering and injustice. For Farmer, suffering was not a divine test, but a human problem, one that could be addressed through compassion, science, and collective action. His work embodies the secular humanist belief in the power of human agency to create change. If there is no divine plan, no ultimate justice, how do we find meaning in the face of suffering? Atheism and secular humanism offer a different lens through which to view the problem of evil. They remind us that while suffering is a part of life, it's also within our power to alleviate it, to create meaning, to build a better world. Atheism and secular humanism invite us to look within ourselves for answers. They challenge us to take responsibility for our world, to find meaning in our connections to each other and to the cosmos. The problem of natural evil. Imagine a hurricane tears through a coastal town, leaving nothing but rubble in its wake. A wildfire consumes entire forests, displacing thousands. A tsunami swallows entire communities, leaving behind unimaginable loss. This is natural evil, suffering caused not by human hands, but by the forces of nature. And it raises a brutal question. If God is all-powerful and all-good, why does he allow such devastation? Theologians and philosophers have struggled to explain natural evil. Some argue it's the result of a fallen world, corrupted by human sin. Others suggest it's a necessary byproduct of natural laws, laws that allow for life to exist in the first place. But here's the hard truth. These explanations often feel hollow in the face of real suffering. When a child dies in an earthquake or a family loses everything in a flood, abstract theories offer little comfort. Take the 2004 Indian Ocean tsunami, which killed over 230,000 people. Was this part of a divine plan? Or was it simply the result of tectonic plates shifting? A random, indifferent act of nature? For many, natural evil is the most damning evidence against the existence of an all-powerful, all-good God. It's a challenge that demands answers, not platitudes. So where does this leave us? If God won't stop natural disasters, perhaps it's up to us. Through science, technology, and collective action, we can mitigate the impact of natural evil. But this raises another question. If we can solve these problems, why couldn't God? The scale of suffering. Now let's talk about the scale of suffering. Not just individual tragedies, but the sheer magnitude of pain and loss throughout history. Think about it, over 6 million Jews murdered in the Holocaust. Millions more killed in genocides in Rwanda, Cambodia, and Armenia. Billions of lives lost to war, famine, and disease. How can any theodicy, any attempt to justify God's goodness, explain this? How can we reconcile the existence of an all-powerful, all-loving God with the staggering scale of human suffering? Some argue that suffering is necessary for free will or soul-making, but does that justify the Holocaust? Does that justify the millions of children who die from preventable diseases every year? Consider the COVID-19 pandemic, which claimed millions of lives and devastated economies worldwide. Was this part of a divine plan? Or was it simply the result of a virus mutating and spreading, a natural, amoral event? For many, the scale of suffering is the ultimate rebuttal to the idea of a benevolent God. It's a challenge that demands more than faith. It demands accountability. If God won't intervene, then it's up to us. Through medicine, education, and social justice, we can reduce suffering on a global scale. But this raises a troubling question. If we can make the world better, why hasn't God? The hiddenness of God. Finally, let's confront the hiddenness of God. If God exists, why does he remain so elusive? Why does he allow doubt, skepticism, and disbelief to flourish? Think about it. If God revealed himself clearly and unequivocally, wouldn't that eliminate suffering caused by ignorance, conflict, and sin? Wouldn't that make faith unnecessary and suffering avoidable? The hiddenness of God is one of the most controversial aspects of the problem of evil. Some argue that God's silence is a test of faith, a way to cultivate trust and humility. Others suggest that God's hiddenness allows for genuine free will, for us to choose belief or disbelief without coercion. But here's the problem. If God is all-powerful and all-loving, why wouldn't He make His presence known in a way that eliminates suffering? Why wouldn't He intervene to stop atrocities, to comfort the grieving, to heal the sick? Consider the story of Elie Wiesel, a Holocaust survivor who famously questioned God's silence during the atrocities of World War II. In his memoir, Night, Wiesel describes watching a young boy hanged by the Nazi and hearing a voice ask, "Where is God now?" For Wiesel, the hiddenness of God was not a theological puzzle, but a personal, agonizing reality. It's a question that resonates with anyone who has ever felt abandoned in their darkest moments. So, where does this leave us? If God is hidden, is He indifferent? Is He powerless? Or is He simply not there at all? The hiddenness of God is a challenge that demands more than faith. It demands honesty. It forces us to confront the possibility that the universe may not have a divine plan, that suffering may not have a higher purpose. And if that's the case, then it's up to us to create meaning, to fight for justice, to build a better world. Not because God wills it, but because we must. Moral evil and human responsibility. Now, let's talk about moral evil, the suffering caused not by nature, but by human hands. Wars, genocides, systemic injustice. These are not acts of God, but choices made by people. And this raises a brutal question. If God is all-powerful and all-good, why does He allow us to inflict such horrors on each other? The free will defense argues that evil exists because God gave us the freedom to choose. Without free will, we'd be mere puppets, incapable of genuine love or morality. But here's the problem. Does free will justify the Rwandan genocide, where over 800,000 people were slaughtered in 100 days? Does it justify slavery, colonialism, or systemic racism? Consider the Rwandan genocide. Neighbors turned on neighbors, friends betrayed friends, and the world stood by as the bloodshed unfolded. Was this the price of free will? Or was it a failure of humanity? And, by extension, a failure of God? If God won't intervene to stop moral evil, then it's up to us. Through education, activism, and systemic change, we can fight injustice and reduce suffering. But this raises a troubling question. If we can solve these problems, why couldn't God? Existential evil. Now let's go deeper. Beyond natural disasters, beyond human cruelty, to the very heart of existence itself. This is existential evil. The idea that evil is woven into the fabric of reality, into the absurdity of life and the inevitability of death. We are born into a world we didn't choose, forced to confront our own mortality, and left to grapple with the question of meaning in a universe that seems indifferent to our struggles. Philosophers like Albert Camus and Jean-Paul Sartre saw this as the ultimate challenge. For Camus, the absurdity of life, the clash between our desire for meaning and the universe's silence, was the root of existential evil. In his essay, The Myth of Sisyphus, Camus imagines Sisyphus, condemned to roll a boulder up a hill for eternity, only to watch it roll back down. It's a metaphor for the human condition, a relentless, seemingly meaningless struggle. But here's the twist. Camus argues that we must imagine Sisyphus happy. By embracing the absurdity of life, we can find joy in the struggle itself. But is it enough? Can we truly find meaning in a universe that offers no answers, no purpose, no redemption? Consider the story of Viktor Frankl, the Holocaust survivor who wrote Man's Search for Meaning. Frankl argued that even in the face of unimaginable suffering, we can choose our response. We can create meaning, even in a meaningless world. Existential evil forces us to confront the hardest questions. Why are we here? What is the point of it all? And if there is no point, how do we go on? For some, the answer lies in rebellion, in defying the absurdity of existence by creating our own meaning. For others, it's a call to embrace the mystery, to find beauty in the struggle, and to live fully, even in the face of despair. So, as we confront existential evil, let's not shy away from the questions. Let's stare into the void and ask, what does it mean to be human in a universe that doesn't care? And how do we find meaning when there may be none to find? The scientific perspective. Now let's shift gears and look at the problem of evil through the lens of science. While science doesn't deal with morality or theology, it offers a stark, unflinching view of the universe, one that challenges traditional ideas about suffering and meaning. First, consider evolution. Charles Darwin's theory of natural selection reveals a brutal truth. Life is a struggle for survival. Species compete, adapt, and evolve, or they die out. Pain, suffering, and death are not anomalies, they're fundamental to the process of life itself. But here's the hard question. If life evolved through such a ruthless process, what does that say about the nature of existence? Is suffering simply the price of evolution? Or is it evidence of a universe that doesn't care about morality at all? Next, consider cosmology. The universe is vast, ancient, and indifferent. Stars explode, galaxies collide, and planets form, all governed by physical laws that have no regard for life or suffering. The Big Bang, the event that birthed our universe, was not a moral act. It was a random, chaotic explosion that set the stage for everything that followed. And yet, here we are, tiny, fragile beings on a speck of dust, trying to make sense of it all. Finally, consider neuroscience. Our brains are complex machines, shaped by millions of years of evolution. Pain, fear, and suffering are not just abstract concepts. They're hardwired into our biology. But here's the twist. Our brains also give us the capacity for empathy, compassion, and love. These traits evolved not because the universe is moral, but because they helped us survive and thrive as a species. So, what does science tell us about the problem of evil? It tells us that suffering is not a moral failing or a divine punishment. It's a natural part of existence. It tells us that the universe is indifferent to our struggles, but it also gives us the tools to confront them. And perhaps most importantly, it tells us that we are not passive victims of a cruel world. We are active participants, capable of understanding, mitigating, and even transcending suffering. As we confront the problem of evil, let's not turn away from the scientific perspective. Let's embrace it, not as a replacement for faith or philosophy, but as a powerful tool for understanding the world and our place in it. Because in the end, the question is not just why suffering exists. It's what we're going to do about it. Imagine a world where no one could ever make a wrong decision, where every action was predetermined to be good and suffering was impossible, would that be a perfect world? Or would it be a world without meaning, without true choice, without the very essence of what makes us human? The free will defense is one of the most widely discussed arguments in response to the problem of evil. It suggests that suffering exists because humans have the ability to make choices, real independent choices that shape their lives. But is free will worth the cost of pain and suffering? And does it truly explain the presence of evil in the world? At its heart, the free will defense claims that true freedom requires the ability to choose between good and evil. If humans were only capable of making good decisions, then they wouldn't truly be choosing anything at all. They would be pre-programmed like robots, incapable of moral agency. The philosopher Alvin Plantinga, one of the most influential defenders of this argument, puts it this way: a world containing creatures who are significantly free is more valuable, all else being equal, than a world containing no free creatures at all. In other words, the ability to choose is a fundamental part of what makes life meaningful. But if free will is such a good thing, why does it lead to so much suffering? Couldn't an all-powerful God have given us free will while still ensuring that people only made good choices? Why not a world where everyone freely chooses good? This is a central counterpoint to the free will defense. If God is omnipotent, couldn't he have created a world where people always choose to do good, even while maintaining free will? The response to this argument is that free will, by its very nature, means the ability to choose wrongly. If people were incapable of making bad choices, then their actions wouldn't be genuinely free. They would be coerced or predetermined. Imagine a world where every time someone tried to lie, cheat, or steal, they were physically unable to do so. They might try to hurt someone, but an invisible force would stop them. Would that be free will? Or would it be an illusion of freedom, where moral actions are no longer meaningful because there's no real alternative? Philosophers like Plantinga argue that moral goodness has real value only if it is chosen freely. For example, love is only meaningful if it is given voluntarily. A person forced to love someone isn't really loving them. It's just obedience. The same logic applies to moral actions. True goodness requires the possibility of evil. One of the biggest criticisms of the free will defense is that it only explains moral evil, the suffering caused by human choices, like war, crime, and betrayal. But what about natural evil? Earthquakes, diseases, tsunamis, and other disasters that have nothing to do with human decisions. If free will explains why humans harm each other, how does it explain why nature itself seems cruel and indifferent? Some philosophers argue that natural disasters aren't truly evil in a moral sense, because they don't involve intent. A hurricane doesn't choose to destroy a city. However, this doesn't resolve the issue, it only shifts the question. If God is omnipotent and loving, why design a world where nature causes immense suffering? One possible answer is that suffering from nature creates an environment where moral growth is possible. Struggles like illness and loss force people to develop virtues such as courage, compassion, and resilience. In a world without hardship, would these virtues even exist? Would we ever develop true empathy without witnessing suffering firsthand? However, critics argue that this seems like an unnecessarily harsh way to build character. Couldn't a perfect being create a world where people grow in virtue without immense pain and suffering? This question remains one of the strongest challenges to the free will defense. Is free will worth the cost? If we accept that free will necessitates the existence of moral evil, the next question is it worth it? Is a world with suffering truly better than a world without choice? This is where perspectives diverge. Some argue that even if free will results in suffering, it allows for the highest forms of human experience: love, heroism, sacrifice, and moral triumph. A world without struggle might seem idyllic, but it could also be empty, devoid of meaning. Without the possibility of failure, would success have any value? Without pain, could we truly appreciate joy? Others, however, argue that the scale of suffering in the world is simply too immense to justify free will. If free will is so valuable, why didn't God at least limit the worst kinds of suffering? Why allow atrocities, immense cruelty, and senseless pain? Some suggest that if an all-loving, all-powerful God exists, he should have created a world with free will and a limit on suffering. These questions lead to deeper theological and philosophical debates about whether human suffering is necessary or whether a different kind of world could have been possible. Alternative perspectives. Do we even have free will? Interestingly, not all philosophers accept the idea that humans truly have free will. Neuroscience and psychology have raised serious questions about whether our choices are genuinely independent, or whether they are determined by biology, environment, and subconscious processes. If free will is an illusion, then the free will defense falls apart, because it relies on the assumption that we are making real moral choices. However, if free will doesn't exist, then can we really hold people accountable for their actions? And if humans aren't free, does that mean suffering is even more meaningless? The free will defense provides a compelling response to the problem of evil, but it is not without its challenges. It argues that suffering exists because genuine moral choice is valuable, and that a world with free will is better than a world without it. However, it struggles to explain natural evil, and raises difficult questions about whether the extent of suffering is truly justified. In the end, whether the free will defense is convincing depends on how one weighs the value of free will against the cost of suffering. Is choice truly so valuable that it justifies all the pain in the world? Or is there a better explanation for why evil exists? Perhaps the answer lies in how we choose to respond to suffering. Whether or not free will explains evil, the way we use our freedom to reduce suffering, show kindness, and seek understanding may be the most meaningful part of the human experience. Imagine waking up one day and realizing that everything you know your life, your struggles, even your deepest emotions, is part of an elaborate simulation. What if suffering isn't just a byproduct of reality, but an intentional test designed by some higher intelligence? Could the pain we endure be meant to shape us, challenge us, or prepare us for something beyond this world? The simulation theory has been gaining traction not just in science fiction, but in serious philosophical and scientific discussions. The idea suggests that what we perceive as reality may be nothing more than an advanced simulation created by a higher intelligence, whether an advanced civilization, an artificial superintelligence, or even a divine being. If true, this raises a fundamental question. Is suffering simply an unavoidable aspect of existence, or is it deliberately woven into the simulation to serve a deeper purpose? Let's explore this possibility and what it means for our understanding of pain, morality, and the nature of reality itself. The idea that we might be living in a simulated reality was popularized by philosopher Nick Bostrom in his 2003 paper, Are You Living in a Computer Simulation? Bostrom argues that if technological civilizations can eventually create hyper-realistic simulations, and if they choose to run many such simulations, then it is statistically more likely that we are inside a simulation rather than in base reality. The argument goes as follows. Civilizations will eventually reach a stage where they can create highly sophisticated simulations of conscious beings. If they have the ability to do so, they will likely create a vast number of such simulations. If the number of simulations vastly outnumbers real base-level realities, then the probability that we are in one of those simulations is extremely high. If this is the case, then suffering may not be accidental. It could be part of a grander design, perhaps to test, teach, or refine us. But why would a simulated world include suffering? If an advanced civilization created us, couldn't they have programmed a world without pain? Is suffering a deliberate test? If we entertain the idea that suffering has a purpose within a simulated reality, several possibilities arise. 1. A moral and ethical experiment. What if suffering exists as a way to observe and test morality? Perhaps the architects of the simulation are studying how beings like us react to hardship, whether we develop virtues like compassion and resilience, or whether we succumb to selfishness and cruelty. This would align with some religious and philosophical views that life is a test of character. Imagine a researcher running an advanced eye experiment to see how digital beings behave under different conditions. If everything were perfect, there would be no way to distinguish between different moral choices. But by introducing suffering, we create a dynamic where morality and free will have meaning. This idea parallels many religious worldviews that depict life as a test. In Christianity, suffering is sometimes seen as a way to refine the soul. In Hinduism and Buddhism, suffering plays a role in karma and spiritual growth. If we are in a simulation, perhaps suffering serves a similar role on a cosmic scale. Two, a growth and development mechanism. Suffering may exist not as a cruel twist of fate, but as a tool for personal and collective growth. Consider how we train AI models. We expose them to challenges so they can learn and adapt. Could our reality work the same way? Think about a video game. If a game had no obstacles, no enemies, no puzzles to solve, would it be engaging? Perhaps our simulated world is designed to foster challenge and achievement. Hardship forces us to develop skills, seek solutions, and innovate. Without suffering, there might be no drive to improve, no need for empathy, and no concept of triumph. If we are in a simulation, the natural question is, who or what created it? 1. An advanced civilization. One possibility is that a hyper-advanced civilization created our world either for scientific research, entertainment, or some purpose beyond our comprehension. This would be similar to how we create virtual worlds, video games, or eye experiments. In this scenario, suffering might be an intended part of the experiment. The simulation's architects could be watching to see how we respond, or they may have programmed suffering as an inherent part of the experience, much like how we include difficulties in video games to make them engaging. Two, a divine programmer. Another interpretation aligns with theological perspectives. What we call God could be the ultimate architect of the simulation. If an all-powerful being created our reality as a test or learning experience, suffering might be a necessary aspect of the design. This aligns with religious notions of life being a preparation for something greater. In many spiritual traditions, The physical world is seen as a temporary phase, leading to a more profound existence beyond it. If we are in a divine simulation, then suffering might be a tool for soul building, shaping our character for a future state of existence. If suffering is a test within a simulation, does that make it easier or harder to bear? Some might find comfort in the idea that pain has a higher purpose, that struggles are not random but part of a grand design. Others might find it unsettling, raising questions about the morality of whoever designed such a system. Consider two perspectives. If suffering is a test, then enduring and overcoming hardship might be the point of existence. The difficulties we face could be refining our consciousness for a higher reality. But if suffering is simply a byproduct of a flawed or indifferent simulation, then our pain may be meaningless and unfortunate side effect of a system that wasn't designed with compassion in mind. Ultimately, the simulation theory does not answer the problem of suffering. It only reframes it. Instead of asking why an omnipotent God allows suffering, we ask why the simulation's designers included suffering in their program. If our world is a simulation, can we break free from it? Some thinkers, like Elon Musk, have speculated that advanced beings inside a simulation might one day wake up to the truth. In religious and spiritual traditions, ideas of enlightenment or transcendence bear a similar resemblance, breaking free from the illusion of the material world. If suffering is a test, then perhaps the goal is to pass it in such a way that we reach a higher state of consciousness, one that allows us to see beyond the illusion. The question remains, if we realize the truth, what would we do with that knowledge? The simulation theory offers a unique perspective on suffering. It suggests that suffering may not be meaningless, but rather an intentional part of a grander design. Whether suffering is a moral test, a tool for growth, or an unfortunate side effect of a digital construct, it forces us to confront the nature of reality itself. Does this explanation make suffering any easier to endure? That depends on whether one sees the simulation as a benevolent test or an indifferent machine. If suffering is truly a test, then perhaps our task is to learn, evolve, and seek a deeper understanding of our reality. If it is just an error in the code, then perhaps our only option is to find meaning within the experience itself. To understand the illusion of evil, we must first explore the nature of perception. Perception is not a direct window into reality. It's a filtered, interpretive version of it. Our brains take in sensory information. Light, sound, touch, and construct a coherent picture of the world, but this picture is not perfect. It's shaped by our beliefs, experiences, and expectations. We've all had days where life feels like a dumpster fire. Your Wi-Fi dies mid-Zoom call, your cat knocks over your coffee, and your boss emails you at 11 p.m. But here's the wild part. What if suffering isn't real? Like, what if it's just your brain messing with you? You know those mind-bending dress that looks blue to you but gold to your friend? Or that video where a spinning dancer seems to switch directions? If our brains can't even agree on colors or movement, how much of our pain is just perception? Your brain isn't a neutral observer, it's a storyteller. It takes raw data, like stubbing your toe, and slaps on layers of meaning. This pain means I'm clumsy. This breakup means I'll die alone. But what if the pain itself isn't the problem? What if it's the story we tell ourselves about it? Example, 2 people get laid off. Person A, I'm a failure. Life hates me. Person B, this sucks, but maybe it's a chance to pivot. Same event, different stories, different suffering. Your brain's basically a social media algorithm. It feeds you content based on what you've clicked before. If you're always doom scrolling your own life, of course suffering feels real. Eastern philosophies have long explored the idea that suffering is an illusion. In Hinduism, the concept of Maya suggests that the world we perceive is not the ultimate reality, but a veil of illusion. According to this view, suffering arises from our attachment to the material world, to things that are transient, impermanent, and ultimately unreal. By seeing through the illusion of Maya, we can transcend suffering and realize our true nature, which is one with the divine. Buddhism takes this idea further. The Buddha taught that suffering, dukkha, is an inherent part of existence, but it arises from our attachment to desires and illusions. By letting go of these attachments, we can achieve nirvana, a state of liberation from suffering. Ever heard Buddhists say, pain is inevitable? Suffering is optional? They're basically saying, pain is stubbing your toe. Suffering is ranting about it for 3 hours. It's like when you're stuck in traffic, the delay is real, but the rage? That's your brain yelling, this shouldn't be happening. Spoiler, the universe doesn't care about should. Traffic happens. Suffering is you arguing with reality. But here's the cool part. You can rewire this. Ever notice how a bad day feels lighter after venting to a friend or watching a dumb cat video? That's you hacking your brain's suffering algorithm. Now, let's turn to science. Neuroscience offers a fascinating perspective on the illusion of evil. According to research, pain and suffering are not just physical experiences, they're constructed by the brain. When you stub your toe, your nerves send signals to your brain, which interprets them as pain. But this interpretation is not fixed. It can be influenced by your thoughts, emotions, and even your expectations. Consider the placebo effect. A sugar pill with no active ingredients can reduce pain simply because the patient believes it will. This shows that pain is not just a physical sensation. It's a mental construct. If a sugar pill can trick you into healing, what else can your brain do? Studies on mindfulness and meditation suggest that we can. By observing our thoughts and emotions without judgment, we can change our relationship to pain. We can see it not as something to be feared or avoided, but as a passing sensation, an illusion that we can transcend. If pain is a construct of the brain, can we deconstruct it? Can we train our minds to perceive suffering differently? Studies show pain isn't just physical, it's an emotional context. Like soldiers in battles sometimes don't feel wounds until after the fight. Their brains go, no time for pain, survive now, cry later. Maybe suffering is like a bad Netflix recommendation. Your brain keeps suggesting you'll love this existential dread, but you can hit skip. Our perception of suffering is also shaped by our beliefs and culture. What one society sees as a tragedy, another may see as a test of faith or a natural part of life. Consider the story of a soldier who sees combat as a noble sacrifice, while a civilian sees it as a senseless tragedy. Both are experiencing the same event, but their perceptions and their suffering are vastly different. Religion plays a powerful role in shaping our perception of suffering. In Christianity, suffering is often seen as a test of faith or a path to redemption. In Islam, it's seen as a test of patience and trust in Allah. In Buddhism, it's seen as an opportunity for growth and enlightenment. If suffering's just perception, does that mean genocide or cancer aren't real? Of course they're real. But here's the twist. The evil part isn't in the event itself. It's in the meaning we assign. Example, A hurricane isn't evil, it's just wind and water. But when it destroys homes, we call it a disaster. The suffering comes from loss, fear, and the story we tell. Why us? Why now? Does this mean we should just shrug off suffering? Not exactly, but it means we have power over how we frame it. Viktor Frankl, a Holocaust survivor, said, "Between stimulus and response, there's a space. And that space is our power to choose." Now, let's bring this idea into the modern world. If suffering is an illusion, what does that mean for the problem of evil? Is evil real, or is it just a construct of the mind? Philosophers like Friedrich Nietzsche argued that good and evil are human inventions, concepts we use to make sense of a chaotic and different universe. In this view, evil is not an objective reality, but a subjective interpretation. But here's the problem. If evil is just a perception, how do we explain the atrocities of history? How do we explain the Holocaust, slavery, or genocide? Are these not real evils, or are they simply the result of distorted perceptions? Perhaps the answer lies in the duality of perception. While suffering may be a construct of the mind, its consequences are undeniably real. The pain of a child in a war zone, the despair of a refugee, the grief of a parent, these are not illusions. They are real experiences shaped by real events. But if we can change our perception of suffering, can we also change its impact? Can we use our understanding of the illusion of evil to create a better world? So, how do we transcend the illusion of evil? How do we move beyond suffering and find peace? The answer may lie in the power of awareness. By becoming aware of our perceptions, we can see through the illusion of suffering. We can recognize pain as a passing sensation, fear as a mental construct, and despair as a temporary state. The cheat code, awareness. When you're spiraling into suffering, ask, is this pain real, or is my brain adding drama? What story am I telling myself? Can I zoom out and see this differently? Example, old story. My breakup means I am unlovable. New story. This hurts, but it's freeing me for something better. You're not denying the pain. You're just refusing to let it write your whole biography. Transcending the illusion of evil is not just an individual journey. It's a collective one. By changing the way we see suffering, we can change the way we respond to it. We can create a world where compassion, empathy, and understanding replace fear, hatred, and despair. Ever notice how every great movie and book has one thing in common? Conflict. The war against Skynet and the Terminator. Harry Potter versus Voldemort. Oedipus Fate and Oedipus Rex. Without struggle, stories flatline. But here's the idea. What if life is the same? What if suffering isn't just a plot device? It's the price of admission for meaning? And would a pain-free world really be a utopia? Or would it be like eating frosting straight from the tub? Sweet at first, then kinda empty. Friedrich Nietzsche, the 19th century philosopher and master of dramatic quotes, argued that suffering is inseparable from human greatness. His famous line, "He who has a why to live can bear almost any how," suggests that meaning is forged in the crucible of adversity. For Nietzsche, suffering isn't a flaw in existence, but its essence. It's the chisel that sculpts resilience, creativity, and depth. He rejected the idea of a pain-free paradise, warning that eliminating suffering would strip life of its vitality. Without struggle, he claimed, humanity would stagnate. A species of last men content with comfort but devoid of purpose. Nietzsche's basically the OG, no pain, no gain. Imagine a world where bench pressing feels like lifting cotton candy. You never get swole. Nietzsche's like, suffering is your mental gym. But why? Because meaning isn't found in winning, it's found in the grind. The late night hustle, the heartbreak, the why did I agree to this Zoom meeting? Dread. Life without suffering is a participation trophy, shiny but hollow. Existentialists like Camus and Sartre took Nietzsche's ideas further. For them, the universe is inherently meaningless, a blank canvas. Suffering isn't a tool for growth, but an absurd reality we must confront. Camus' myth of Sisyphus epitomizes this. Sisyphus, condemned to eternally roll a boulder uphill, finds meaning not in escaping his fate, but in embracing the struggle. Existentialism argues that meaning isn't discovered, it's invented. In a world without inherent purpose, suffering becomes the raw material from which we sculpt our own significance. When you think about it, existentialism is just adulting, but make it philosophical. Camus' Sisyphus is all of us. You wake up, work, sleep, repeat. But Camus is like, own the grind. Roll that boulder like it's the latest trend. Sartre's concept still is other people, but also you're free to unfollow them. Ever met a burnout survivor who started a passion project? That's existentialism in action. They're not waiting for life to hand them a purpose. Suffering isn't the villain, it's their art supply store. No pain, no paint, no mess, no masterpiece. As technology advances, we may be on the verge of radically altering our experience of pain and suffering. Brain implants, AI-driven therapy, and advanced pharmaceuticals could one day reduce emotional and physical suffering to near zero levels. But would a world without suffering be fulfilling? Imagine a future where pain could be completely turned off with a neural switch. Would this lead to a better life, or would it make life feel empty, stripping it of contrast, growth, and meaning? Critics argue that glorifying suffering risks romanticizing trauma. A world without pain could, in theory, free humanity to focus on creativity, connection, and exploration. Utopian visions like Huxley's Brave New World imagine societies where suffering is eradicated through technology only to reveal a new emptiness, a numbness born of comfort. Psychologist Carl Jung warned that avoiding suffering leads to a different kind of torment, stagnation. Yet, modern movements in effective altruism and transhumanism push back, arguing that reducing suffering is the ultimate moral imperative, even if it means redefining what it means to be human. Would a no bad days world suck? Let's play Would You Rather? Option A, life with suffering but purpose, the Nietzsche's gains. Option B, life as an eternal spa day. In other words, no pain but no plot. Utopia's dark side. Imagine Brave New World, everyone's high on happiness pills, but they're also bored out of their minds. No heartbreak, no love songs, no failure, no underdog wins. Real life example, look at Denmark. Ranked one of the happiest countries, yet with high rates of existential angst. Comfort does not equal fulfillment. A pain-free world might be like playing a video game with God mode on, fun for 10 minutes, then, now what? Buddhism and Stoicism offer a balanced view. Suffering is inevitable, but not inherently meaningful. The key is how we relate to it. The Stoic philosopher Epictetus wrote, "It's not events that disturb us, but our judgments about them." Similarly, Buddhism teaches that suffering, dukkha, arises from attachment, not the pain itself. Modern psychology echoes this. Post-traumatic growth studies show that while trauma isn't desirable, many find meaning in its aftermath, rebuilding with newfound resilience or empathy. Think of suffering like a kitchen knife. Use it, don't let it use you. Good use. Chopping veggies for a killer stir fry. Bad use. Stabbing yourself while screaming, "Why me?" Try stoic principle. Next time life throws a tantrum, ask, "Can I control this?" If no, cue up Let It Go and binge The Office. If yes, channel your inner Shonda Rhimes and rewrite the plot. Trauma isn't a gift, but surviving it? That's your superhero origin story. Here's the truth. Suffering isn't necessary for meaning. It's just the most reliable supplier. You don't need a hurricane to appreciate sunshine, but without rain, would we even notice it? A world without suffering might be safer, softer, sanitized. But would it be alive? Would we still write poetry, fall in love, or meme about Mondays? Probably not. So maybe the answer isn't to erase suffering, but to reframe it, to see it as the shadow that makes the light visible. Or as Nietzsche would say, to dance in the storm, even if you've got 2 left feet. Suffering is a paradox. On one hand, it's something we naturally want to avoid. On the other, it shapes our greatest joys, fuels our growth, and gives depth to our experiences. Perhaps the goal is not to eliminate suffering entirely, but to change how we engage with it. If pain is a construct of the mind, then maybe, just maybe, we hold more power over it than we think.